Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me for my presentation, Becoming Team Awesome. This is essentially going to be a presentation about SharePoint Enterprise. And so if that's what you're expecting, then you're in the right place. Mandatory, please turn your phones to silence. You probably already got them on silent for the whole day. I wanted to start out by just giving a brief introduction to myself. So I like to refer to my career as being in two parts, before Power Pivot and after Power Pivot. And in actual fact, more correctly, it was before I discovered Power Pivot, which was about 3 or 4 years after it was actually invented. And so my before Power Pivot life, I basically spent 25 years training to become a Power Pivot consultant. And I did that by working through various roles in sales and customer service and IT, and across a couple of companies associated with Coca-Cola. And then about 12 months ago, I left the corporate world and decided to pursue Power Pivot as a reporting tool and a business intelligence tool. It's something that I really believe in. And so what I'm going to share with you today is what happens once you've got those Power Pivot workbooks developed, and then what you can do with them to share them in SharePoint Enterprise. Can I just start out by getting a show of hands? How many people actually build their own Power Pivot workbook models or have them available to them in their work environment? Okay, great. And how many people have access to SharePoint Enterprise as a, okay, fabulous. So you're definitely in the right place. And very much what I'm going to show you today, in fact, I developed and learnt back in when I was working Coca-Cola, predominantly in the last 12 months or so of my time at Coke. And I'd also just like to point out that I'm not a SharePoint expert. So, I'm not an MVP, I'm not certified, I learnt on YouTube probably like many of you did. So the stuff that I'm going to show you is well within the reach of the average person. There is a little bit of technical stuff, and you might need some help from a web developer at a couple of stages, but everything else is very much within reach, and so I'm going to show you the principles that I go through to make this a positive experience. So basically what I'm going to do, I'm going to start off with a few slides for 5 or 10 minutes, just talk about why we're doing this and why we should care. And then the bulk of the presentation, I'm going to be in SharePoint, just taking you through the steps that I go through to get this experience up and running. I have put some time at the end for Q&A, but I'd actually prefer to get questions as we go. I've got probably 6 or 8 logical sections that we're going to go through. So I'll do my best to remember to ask you for questions at the end of each section, but if you have any questions, please shout out, raise your hand. I'll try and keep my eyes on you to make sure that you don't have to leave your hand up for too long. Okay. So let's just start off talking about sharing. Why do we really care about this? And as you indicated before, we have a lot of people in this room who have built or have access to these Power Pivot workbook models. And if you've learnt Power Pivot, you've got these new superpowers, and it allows you to build reports and capabilities that were never within your reach before. You probably had to go through to IT, maybe get an SSRS report written, or maybe getting someone with analysis services to do the work for you. But that power is now within your hands, and so that causes a couple of problems actually. So in the past, when before Power Pivot came along, many of us were spending maybe 4 or 5, 10 hours a month taking data from different CSV files, cleaning the data, putting it into a single table, doing VLOOKUPs. So we had all of these, let's call them before Power Pivot problems, and so we've solved those problems now with Power Pivot and Power Query. But unfortunately what happens is we just get a whole lot of new problems. So the sorts of things that I'm talking about are, how do you refresh your workbooks? Because now they need to be refreshed against some sort of data source. My personal belief is that the user should not be refreshing the workbooks. I think that's our responsibility. And in doing so, you need to be able to have a method of doing that. So even though you're 5 hours a month better off, it still becomes very annoying 5 minutes every morning to go in and refresh those workbooks and put them wherever it is that you're putting them today. So the other thing is that you come away for a conference for a couple of days, and so you're not in the office environment. You've got to refresh those reports, and if your manager doesn't care that you're at a conference, they just want to know where the updated sales report is. So So refreshing is an issue. Then distributing becomes an issue. So how do you go about doing that? Are you using file shares? Are you using email? A new problem that happens with Power Pivot that didn't really happen before Power Pivot is the workbooks get really large, right? So you can't go emailing a 200 meg workbook every day. So that becomes a problem. And there's always version control. I guess it's just a new type of version control now. So that's an issue and remains an issue. Mobile access is becoming increasingly important, and it will continue to do so. And of course, you can have Excel on your desktop and you can open your workbooks and experience it, but the Excel version that's available on the iPad doesn't support Power Pivot data models, and therefore you can't have the browsing experience. You can open the workbook, but as soon as you hit a slicer, the thing just stops working. And a new and interesting problem is increasing demand. So all of a sudden, people in the business are seeing the types of reports that they've always wanted, and they know where they're coming from. They're coming from you. And so all of a sudden, you've got people hovering around your desk saying, can you just do this for me? Can you just do that for me? And so all of the spare time that you created by removing this repetitive manual work gets taken up by new demand. But of course, the cycle then goes around again. It's a good problem to have, but a problem anyway. So there are better options to sharing your workbooks than email. If your email box looks anything like this, I'm sure many executives within the organisation have this sort of problem. So really there's two choices. And so the first choice is Power BI. Many of you would have been to Power BI sessions here. It's quite well represented. There's a lot of work going into Power BI, and I think it's fabulous, the effort that Microsoft is putting in. But the reality is it's early in the product lifecycle. And so there is not a fully featured, rich control interface in Power BI like there is in Excel. And as a result of that, that may not meet your requirements. So while Power BI is an option for some people, it's certainly not an option for everyone. And then the other option is really SharePoint Enterprise. Now, some of you may have SharePoint Foundation or SharePoint Standard. So what I'm going to show you today does not work in those versions. You need to have Enterprise Edition. Enterprise has a number of inbuilt business intelligence functions. The most important one for what I'm showing you today is what's called the Excel Services. And Excel Services is basically a server-side version of desktop Excel, and its sole purpose in life is to be able to open the Excel workbook and render it in a browser so that you can have that Excel experience without actually having Excel technically installed on your server. So that's what Excel Services does, and it only comes with SharePoint Enterprise. So what I'm going to do today is really move from the left side of this chart, which is what does the generic experience look like when you use SharePoint Enterprise, and I'm going to explain why this experience on the right-hand side is a better experience, why I believe it's a better experience. And then I'm going to step through the process of how I go about configuring SharePoint to look like that. And so I'll save a lot of the conversation about this until we get live in the system. But the bottom line is this to me looks like Excel online, whereas this to me looks like a web browser dashboard. And that's the effect that I'm trying to create here. Okay, so that's it for the slides. I'm going to jump into SharePoint now. And so we're going to do a few things. So I'm going to start off by having a look at that standard experience and just highlighting some of the problems. And then we'll go straight to the end state, looking at the enhanced experience, why it's better, why I believe it's the right way to go. And then we're going to go through the process of preparing your workbooks. So preparation of your Power Pivot data model is all assumed. So I'm assuming that you've got that all set up. But what do you need to do with your workbooks before you load them up onto the server? There are some site settings that need to change, and I'll show you those. And then the process is to create a blank page to hold your workbook and to load your Power Pivot workbook into that page. Create some navigation so that we can use normal menu structure to browse the dashboard or the reporting tool, if you like. And then I've got a couple of little tricks that I harvested off a colleague, which I'll show you right at the end, on just trying to demonstrate some of the power and capability that you can do with SharePoint without actually being a programmer, provided you've got a programmer friend who can help you out. Okay, so let me get started. Try and get this microphone centered. Okay, so first of all, let me show you this generic site. And so this is the out-of-box experience that comes from SharePoint. And so this is SharePoint 2013, and for those of you that have used SharePoint a bit, this is probably familiar. So you get a standard site with standard branding. You have these little applets or applications that are sitting within the screen, and you can do various things depending on what type of site that you've set up. And also down the left-hand side here, we have what's called the Quick Launch Bar, and this allows you to navigate to the documents library, or in the one that we're interested about is the Power Pivot Gallery, and there's a few other options that come in by default. And so when you click on the Power Pivot Gallery, I've obviously loaded up a couple of workbooks here, and you get quite a nice experience. You get to see there's a little hover effect here, so when I hover on different sheets in the workbook, the graphic changes, and if I click on one of these workbooks, it opens up into that full screen Excel online experience that I described before. And this is essentially what I want to get away from. So the things I don't like about this specifically are the grid lines. You know, I don't think they're necessary. It makes it look like Excel. You can see down the bottom here we have our sheet tabs. You've got row numbers, headers. You've got a menu here which allows the user to do a whole lot of things, including download the file. That may be desirable in your case. It may not be desirable, but I certainly, when I'm distributing workbooks this way, I don't like users downloading them from the server. You can open it directly in Excel. There's also this refresh button, and as I said before, I don't think it's appropriate for users to be refreshing the reports because it might not be the right time of the day. They don't know when the sales and the data becomes available. So this really should be done on a schedule outside of the user experience, and that maximizes the speed and performance for the user, and they're not worrying about waiting for data to refresh. There's a couple of other things I don't like about it. Once you come into a sheet like this, you know, how do you get back to that Power Pivot Gallery that you had before? You know, there's a saying with user interfaces that if you have to explain the user interface, then it's not a very good user interface. And so, you know, particularly the higher up in the organisation you get, the executives may not know to click the back button in order to get back to that previous page. The other way that you can navigate back here is, you see this breadcrumb trail here. I can click on this site link here and that will take me back to that page. But it's not intuitive, and I don't think it's good enough as a fully deployed reporting tool. The other thing that I don't like about this approach is, and when I come back to this screen here, is this logo and this side pane takes up a lot of screen real estate. Now, it's not such an issue when you've got a widescreen laptop, which most of our users will have these days. But once you move to an iPad and you're looking at a report in portrait mode, this sort of quick launch toolbar down the side takes up a significant amount of your screen real estate, and I think that's a problem. So generally speaking, I get rid of them, and I'll show you how to do that. And then this logo at the top here, just have a look at the amount of space between, you know, the top of this page and where the top of the browser actually appears. So there's a lot of wasted space. So I'm trying to optimize the layout of SharePoint so that it gives me maximum space for my reporting canvas, and therefore I can give a maximum experience to the user. Okay, so that's the generic experience, and let me jump straight into the enhanced experience. Incidentally, the demo that I'm using today is using a hosted service through Portalfront. You can go to my website, and on one of the menu items there is actually access to this portal, so it's got the user login credentials and password on there, and you can navigate and have a look at yourself and get a sense of the experience. And particularly on iPad, if you want to give a sense of how it works on an iPad, you can do that. So feel free to do that. I'm not sure what would happen if everyone did it at once, but it's certainly there and available. Okay, so here's the enhanced experience. So I just want to call out the key things that I think are important. So first of all, notice how my branding appears on this page, whereas when I was on the previous page, it was a full screen Excel experience. So whatever your corporate branding is, you get the opportunity of putting that on the page as part of the experience. The navigation now is here via menus at the top, so I can call these whatever I want and give them a logical navigation. I don't have to explain to anyone how this works. You move your mouse over this word and it turns into a hand. everyone knows that that means it's a hyperlink, and so you get that immediate experience. You can see there's no lines on the page, so they've all been hidden. No tabs, no rows, no columns. All of those things are completely gone. And so we would know that this is Excel because we're Excel professionals. But I think the average executive who wasn't in Excel every day would struggle to tell the difference between this and just any other publishing tool that's used for sharing workbooks. And of course, importantly, these things all work. So the slices work. And just one thing to point out with SharePoint, the way SharePoint works is that you take your Excel workbook and you save it up in the server, and it's stored there in a file repository. The first time you come in and interact with the chart, it basically sends an alarm out to SharePoint that says, hey, someone wants a different view of this workbook. SharePoint takes the data model from the workbook and it loads it up into an instance of SQL Server Tabular. And then once it's loaded in Tabular, then the calculation is done and the rendering gets sent to the screen. So the first time that happens, it can take 5, 10, depends on how big your data model is and how powerful your server is. But generally speaking, thereafter, the response is pretty snappy and a positive experience. Yes? Okay, so the question was, in the generic version I had a team site, and is this a page? So yes, this is a page. So it's still a team site, but that team site branding and layout's just not visible. And so I'm taking direct control over what users can access on the site. You see here that there's none of the little cog icon, which is generally available for an administrator up in the right-hand corner, is not available. And so by removing all those other navigation options down the left-hand side, what I've been able to do is just basically encapsulate them within the pages that I want them to see and nothing else. Now there might be other SharePoint experiences that you want, and that has another purpose, and maybe you've got another sub-site that you're using for that. But this would typically be a very targeted BI dashboard site, which is, I'll call it dumbed down if you like, but basically locked down so that it gives that enhanced experience. Okay, yeah, so the hyperlinks work. There's a couple of other things here which I'll show you later on, but so that's pretty much what the standard experience looks like. So what I'd like to do now is go in and show you how do we get to, what's the steps to get to this point. So let me jump over to what a standard workbook would look like. So this is exactly the same workbook before I do the work on it, preparing it to upload to the server. Okay, just let me zoom it down a little bit. I won't make it fit on the screen because obviously it makes it smaller and you can't see the detail. So this is what a standard workbook looks like. Now, as many of you would be aware, there are a number of ways that you can turn off the grid lines. And so particularly if you come up here to the View menu, there's a number of options here that you can use to make the Excel user interface look less like Excel. These tabs down here, you can turn them off by coming up here, into Options, and come down to Advanced, and somewhere around here there's a Turn Off Tabs. Can't find it in a hurry. I'm committed now. I'm going to find it. Okay, here it is. Show Sheet tabs. So you can turn it off. So you can do these things manually before you upload your Excel workbooks, and that works. And those changes that you made will be visible on the site. I don't like doing it this way for a couple of reasons. First of all, there are going to be times when you need to maintain these workbooks. And so depending on where you keep your master copy, you may download the recent copy from SharePoint, make changes and load it up again, or probably, more wisely, you would have a master storage location on your computer. Every time you need to make an enhancement, add another button, you open up that workbook and make the changes. So from experience, when you need to make those changes, this is a really painful way to do it. So the first thing you do is you come and you turn on the formula bar, turn on the headings, turn on the grid lines, come down here and turn on the sheet tabs and click OK. And then it's back to a format that makes it easier for you to do that manipulation work. And of course, if you want to bet your bottom dollar, when you save the work and put it back up into SharePoint, you're going to forget to turn them back off again. And the number of times that I've loaded workbooks back up, not having turned this stuff off, I started to find another solution because it's not really workable. And so basically what I'm using is style sheet styling on the SharePoint site to turn off each of these elements, and I'll share that with you shortly. And that just means that I can use, when it's in Excel, it's the Excel experience. When it's loaded up onto a dedicated server, it's the web browsing experience that I've been talking about. Okay, so that's the first thing that needs to happen. Secondly, and very importantly, is you need to give consideration to the screen real estate of your target audience. So most organizations tend to have some sort of standard operating environment, so you might have a standard device with a certain screen resolution. And so you need to understand what those screen resolutions are before you finish your reports, because the last thing you want to do is get these up onto a server and then have to scroll bars everywhere, having to scroll on and off the page to be able to see the entire report. So once again, from experience, what I did to solve this problem is I just created a simple screen sizing page. So I basically set all my columns and rows to 10 pixels, and then I grouped them in 10 sets of 10 pixels, so each of these sort of rainbow coloured squares is 100 by 100 pixels, and then I deliberately made that go off the page and down the page so that once I loaded this workbook up into my page on SharePoint, I would be able to see from the browser exactly how wide I can make my workbook and exactly how long I can make my workbook in the Excel environment before uploading it. And I'll show you what that looks like when we get back into the server in a moment. Okay, so once you've got that sizing right, then what you need to do is come back to your workbook and make sure that it's appropriately spaced and laid out. Some of the things that I've done here to do that, this used to be a pivot table. I turned it into cube values and cube formula just so that I could resize it and basically squash it up on the page and make it fit into a widescreen format. And then the last and important thing that you need to do is you need to hide all of the rows and columns in your workbook that are not used. Now, the reason you need to do this, I didn't specifically show you in the generic example, but let me just quickly do that now. So when you go into one of the workbooks here, what the user is able to do is they're able to navigate off the page, right? So they hit their keyboard, they hit their mouse, and they end up somewhere down in the spreadsheet in the middle of nowhere. They don't know where they are, they don't know how they got there, they don't know how to get back, and that can be a problem, and it's just not a great experience. The other problem is that if you've got all these extra rows and columns, is once we load it up into the web part, you'll actually end up with a duplicate set of scroll bars, and so you end up with a scroll bar here for the browser, and you end up with a second scroll bar for the web part, which I'm going to put in a moment, and then the user's got double scroll bars, and it's just horrible. So as a result of that, the way to solve it is to, in your Excel workbook, just hide the rows and columns that you're not using. That then gives you a very targeted little canvas which is optimized for your screen real estate, and when you display that in the web part, as I'll show you in a moment, then it gives you that experience that I talked about. Okay, any questions on that before we move on? It's pretty sound stuff. Yes? SharePoint Online is a good question. I believe it does work. However, I don't know if there's anyone here from Microsoft, so anyone who knows better than me here, please correct me. But my understanding is that SharePoint Online has a 10 megabyte data model size limit. So, and that's not workbook limit, so the workbook can be larger, maybe a couple of hundred megabytes, I think, but I believe the data model limit is 10 megabytes, and so that very quickly becomes a barrier for many people. Oh, the formatting definitely works, yeah. So it will work, and as long as your workbook is less than that 10 megabytes, then it's going to work. Of course, many companies don't have SharePoint Enterprise, and SharePoint Enterprise, it's not a sort of thing that you just decide one day, I'd like the BI features, I think I'll just install SharePoint Enterprise. It really doesn't work that way. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars for enterprise-wide licensing, and also many companies who do have SharePoint, because of the incremental cost, they haven't purchased it, and maybe because originally there was no compelling reason to do so. I actually think this is a compelling reason to do so, but if you've already made those investment decisions, it may be too late to go back. And so, as I said before, I'm actually using a hosted service here. So this is using a company called Portalfront. Portalfront has actually purchased SharePoint Enterprise on-premise edition, and then they've set it up, configured it, and they sell it off as a service. And then you can buy that and set up your own sites on a monthly subscription basis. So there is another company, PivotStream. They're the only two that I know of, but it's certainly available in that way. Sorry, if you have a question. It's all possible and available, it's just the user interface is different. So in fact, when I first did this at Coke, we were using SharePoint 2010 and it all worked exactly the same. I think the main difference, I'm going to show you one of the styling changes I need to make, and so you wouldn't be able to take the styling changes straight out of the box that I've got here and will share into a 2010 environment, but if you had a SharePoint person on site, they would be able to very quickly work out what needs to happen to your SharePoint 2010 master file in order to be able to make that change. Okay, so that's the preparation of the workbook. And so let's now jump over to, I'm going to change my login. So I'm now logged in as a administrator. Now, once again, because I'm on a hosted service, I've pretty much got full and complete access rights here. If you're in a corporate situation, you might have access rights for and administration rights for your particular site, but you may not have administration rights to the next level up, which is the site collection, and so you might need to find the right person in IT to do these next couple of steps for you. So, so the next step is to prepare your SharePoint Enterprise site for use, because there's a couple of settings that don't get turned on by default, and I'm going to show you those now. So in this site collection administration, so this is the section that you may not have, even though you're an administrator. There is a setting here saying site collection features. And this is just basically a configuration panel of the various settings that you can change. And there's a couple of important ones. Just let me scroll down here a little bit more. This is it here, I think. So, so a couple of settings here. There's the sorry, I just can't find it on the fly. I know why. It's because I'm in the wrong site. So just let me swap over to the enhanced site. Okay. Here we go. All right, so these are the two that need to be turned on. So there's the SharePoint Server Enterprise Site Collection features. And so this is the extra capability that you get when you buy the Enterprise Edition. I don't know why it's turned off by default, given that you only would buy this edition if you're after these services. And this is what we're looking for, this one here, the Excel Services application, which is also known as the Excel web app. And so when we go in to create a page, you won't be able to insert Excel workbooks unless this particular setting is turned on. And then there's this second one here, SharePoint Server Publishing Infrastructure. That's just a group of settings which makes the control of navigation and promotion of workbooks, and pages and things a little bit more granular and easier to use. It also means that you don't have to use SharePoint Designer, which is a free download, to do some of the next steps which I'm about to show you. Okay, so that's the turning on the configuration. And then the next thing to do is to set the master page. So I mentioned before that I control the lines and the tabs and the rows and the columns by using styling, and so that's using cascading style sheets. So, so this is an example of what that coding looks like. So I got a developer to do all of this for me. So and you know, it really wasn't a lot of work. It was probably a day elapsed effort to get everything done the way I wanted to do it. But what the developer did is, browsed around the site, worked out which features I wanted to turn on and off. He worked out what was the correct style sheet settings to do that, and then he's given me this sort of marked up version. So this side nav box is used to hide the left navigation bar. And so I'll make this available to everyone at the end of this. It's in the deck, and so then if you don't want to hide the nav box, all you need to do is put a comment around it, and it basically turns the navigation box back on. Now, because this is in a style sheet, this styling will apply to the entire site. it is also possible to take this styling individually and put them on individual pages just to change the styling of individual pages if that's what you want to do. But I found it best to apply it to the entire site. So that's the first thing, and then the second thing is that you need to change the master page. And so this master page button is only here when you turn on the site publishing features that I showed you a moment ago. So when we click on master page, there's this drop down here that says that I'm currently using my custom master page. The default for SharePoint 2013 is Seattle. In fact, if I turn this back to Seattle and update it, you'll see how the styling then disappears. So the logo now is appearing further down the page, and see I've got all this wasted menu space here. My menus come back, and in fact if I browse to one of these pages, you can see the headings have returned, the lines have returned, and all those sorts of things. And so basically we've taken the master page, we've told the master page to move this logo up into this position, up the top left-hand corner, to take up less space, and then we've told it to apply the styling from that branding.css sheet, and that's all it's done. As I said, I got a technical person to do that, and then it's completely within your ability then to come here. You don't need SharePoint Designer, so if you come to master pages, you can just upload your master page here using this upload document. Once it appears in this list, you go back to the master page section and you change the default from Seattle to whatever you called your version of the master page. And in 2010, the master page is called V4, and so this is the main area that's different for 2013 and 2010. So you just need to get a developer to work out where's the part of the code that controls where the logo sits in the V4 master. They take a copy of it, they make that line change, and then save it and connect to the branding, and that's it. So not a lot of work. You might even be able to work it out yourself if you've done a little bit of coding. And of course you could leave the logo where it is. That would also be an option. Okay, so this is where I upload the master page, and if I go into site contents here, I've got a feeling, where did I put the CSS is in the document. I think it's in here. So here's the branding.css. You can't see the extension, but this is basically where the branding file gets loaded. Okay, any questions on that before we move on? Yes? So the question was, what's the code or the approach to make this branding apply to a single page rather than the entire site? Well, the code is actually the same, but it's just how you connect that code to the website or to the SharePoint site. So I've connected it to the master page, which basically means that coding is applied everywhere. If I take an individual line of that code, and I'll show you how to load code onto a page in a moment, you can then load an individual line of code, and that will then just style that one page. Well, I'm going to do some JavaScript, but in this case you would use CSS and just put it on a single page. Yep, that's exactly right. Yes? So the question is, can you save it as a site template? So this is where you're stretching my my SharePoint expertise. I do know that there is a way that you can configure a master site so that every site that is created off of that master inherits all of these settings, and so that would probably do what you're talking about. I'm sure there'd be a way of saving this as a master template that could be reapplied as well. But frankly, it's 5 clicks to make the change. So unless you're pumping out 10 of these a week, which is probably not likely, you're going to spend more time actually doing the configuration than this sort of once-off setup. But there probably is a way, and if you've got SharePoint, you'd have someone who probably knows how to do it. Okay, so the next step is to create a new page. So let me go back behind the scenes and have a look at the site content. And I'm going to jump into this wiki site pages library. And this is where basically every page that we want to render on the screen with a particular workbook in it, we need to create its own unique page here in this particular library. And it's as simple as just clicking on New Document. Let's call this Bacon 2015. Now it's important to note that this name will eventually appear up in the URL, so it's better not to use spaces, otherwise you get these percentage 20 things happening all the time. So tend not to use spaces in the page names, and click Create, and you can see the URL up there. And then this is it. We've just got a blank canvas. So, I mean, it could be Microsoft Word for anything else. It's, in 2013, you've got the ribbon effect for the editing. There's a whole lot of styling that you can apply yourself here with headings and other things. And so that's what the blank page looks like. And then we're going to use this to insert our web part so that we can then attach a workbook. So to do that, we click on Insert, and then there's this little button here that says Web Parts. Here is the Embed Code button, back to the earlier question about how do you apply styling. So you would click on that Embed Code and you can put an individual line of code in there and it gets processed correctly without having to put the right wrappers of style sheets and all that sort of stuff around. Okay, so we're going to insert a web part and go to Business Data, and here's the Excel Web Access web part. So this whole folder, I believe, is completely not visible if you haven't turned on your SharePoint Enterprise settings. So if you've got SharePoint Enterprise Edition, you're trying to find the Excel web part and you can't find it, chances are it hasn't been turned on. You need to track down your site collection administrator and get them to turn it on for you. So we're going to select that and just click Add. And it's basically a wrapper. So it's a framework here. It's got a whole lot of settings and some hyperlinks here that you can configure. But the one thing that we're going to do is we're going to point a workbook to this web part, and then we're going to set a couple of default settings so that it gives us the experience that we want. So I normally come up here in the corner, there's a little Edit Web Part button. What I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to connect that, that sizing sheet that I showed you before. So I've loaded that up on the folder. So to connect the sheet, you just click on this browse. Not 100% sure where I put it actually, but let's see if we can find it. Here it is. So here's my screen sizing page. I'll just insert that. And then there is a few other settings. In fact, I'm going to, let me just save that first. So before I make any styling changes, oh, it doesn't want something. Okay, there might be something wrong with that workbook, but before I make any changes, you can see here that we have this menu. In fact, the menu is probably not complete. There would be some more menu. Let me go back and change the document that's pointing to. So I'll just go back in, edit the web part, and I'm going to point it to a different document. So I'll take one of my workbooks. This is just a copy of what's already loaded up there. So just click on it, click Insert. I think that's the old warning. I'm hoping it's the old warning. Click Apply. Okay, so this, and let me save it so it goes back to the proper screen. Okay, so this is what, without any styling or any settings changed in this web part, you can see that the web part takes the complete width of the screen. This is that second scroll bar that I talked about. So this is actually secondary to the browser. So if I sort of shrink the browser right down, you can see now I've got two scroll bars. I've got this one here and I've got this one here, and completely confusing for users. You want to prevent that from happening. And so also there's a whole lot of navigation stuff here, which is this out-of-the-box Excel stuff that I showed you before in the standard experience. And so I want to turn that off and basically try and get it to the minimalist approach that I had before. So there's only a couple of settings that need to change. So we'll come back in here and edit this web part. So first of all, there's this toolbars and title bar section. And there is a drop-down menu here that controls a couple of default settings, so you can have the full toolbar or some sort of summary. And in fact, there's a whole lot of other settings here that individually you can use checkboxes to turn off one or more of those things. But I don't like any of them. I just turn the whole lot off. So it's as simple as coming in here and changing it from full to none. And then, then there's only one more thing you need to do, and that's come into this appearance section. And so this is where you're controlling how high and wide your web part will be on the page. And this is why it's important to get your underlying workbook to the right size, because you want your workbook to be just slightly smaller than the screen real estate that you're setting up for your browser. And so I'm going to change this from 400 to 850, and I'm going to leave the width as being automatic. And this Chrome title is it's just like a thin line box around the web part. And once again, I just don't think it adds any value, so I turn it off. Just turn it off. So click OK and then save. And you end up with that the experience that you saw on the front page there. I don't know whether you can see here, but there actually is a scroll bar here. Now, when you use these projectors, the resolution of your screen often gets crunched down, and as a result of that, the scroll bar appears. But I can probably actually zoom it down and get rid of that horizontal scroll bar, so that's probably a better fit. But generally speaking, vertical scroll bars, not so much of a problem. People are used to using those in browsers. You really just got to get away from having horizontal scroll bars. If people have to scroll horizontally, then your report's not being designed correctly, and you should make changes. And of course, the slices all work exactly as you would expect. Okay, so we've got our workbook. We've loaded it up on the server. We created a page. We put a web part. We attached our workbook to the web part. But we don't have any navigation yet. So the next thing to do is to put a menu at the top so that people can come to this particular page. Now, so this page is exactly the same as this one here, except this page is Bacon and this dashboard is just called Home, but obviously it looks exactly the same. And so the navigation is pretty easy. So you come into Site Settings, and there's a little hyperlink here called Navigation. So just click on that. And it brings up a whole lot of settings, but really there's only a couple of things that you need to worry about, and that's this stuff here. Whoops. That's these items here. So there's the global navigation, and then I've got two separate menu items here. And basically these three menus here are directly relating to 1, 2, 3 menus here. So, so this first one, this dashboard, you control the name in a different location. I'll show you that in a moment. But these two are basically additional menus that I've manually added. So to add a menu, all I do is just click Add a Link. I'll give it a title. And I can browse for the specific page. So this was a site page, Bacon 2015. I can force that to open a new window if I want, but I think the browsing experience works best when you don't do that. And there's also this audience access. This is basically user access control for your menu item. So you can determine that one group of users can see this menu and another group of users can't see the menu. So it's quite good. You can use your same framework for giving different levels of access to different users. So that works quite well. It is important though that if you're going to use this feature, all we're controlling here is the menu. We're not controlling access to the file. And so anyone with the right URL could navigate directly to the page. And so it's important that you actually go down and lock the file down with the same user credentials back in the place where we've loaded it up. But I'm not going to do that. I'll just click OK. And we've got a new menu item here. And there's also the ability of doing nested headings. So if I create a heading here, in fact, you don't even have to have URLs for each of these levels of the hierarchy. So I can just create a new heading there, and I can take this Bacon one and move it down. It's now a subset. And maybe I'll just add another one just for, let's go, you can add something else here. Okay, so I've edited my headings. I'll click OK, and you can see now that my new menu item appears at the top, and here's this drop-down thing. And so, incidentally, you can link to other sites. So this is one way that you could have a different SharePoint site. You can put hyperlinks between your sites, and the user really doesn't even have to know that they're jumping between sites and that you've got a lockdown version specifically for your reporting, and maybe your general business data is in another place. So that works quite well. Okay, I would like to try and just get this spacing page. I'm going to try it one more time because I think it's useful just to, I've got my menu here now, right? So it's useful to show what that looks like. So I'm just going to go and try and change this workbook again. In fact, let me do one more thing. I'm going to re-upload that workbook. Just let me close it. Okay, so go into site contents. The file was in documents, I think. And so when you upload a file, you can just browse from your local computer. And where's my file? And there's an option here to overwrite existing files, and so this is the way that you can manually replace the old version of the file with a new version of the file, and then everything else is still connected, so the new version gets rendered in the browser the next time the user refreshes. So that works quite well. So it's asking for some version control information. I'm just going to accept the defaults, and now we're going to go back and try this again. Excuse me. So I'm going to repoint this Excel web part to my documents sizing. And then I'll save that. Okay, so this is the way that I load it up, and then you can see here, I mean, the resolution's not great on the screen here, but I can see that, in fact, this is extremely wide screen. It goes to like 22, so 22,200 pixels across, and then my eyesight's not that good, but can't see how far down it goes, but I could zoom it up, but then that sort of defeats the purpose, right? Because the whole idea is you want to see what the standard experience is. I actually have zoomed it down for the reason I explained before with the projector. Yes, I have a question. They definitely need access to the document. So I guess that implies the document. Yeah, you definitely need that.
So they would still have access if they knew how to get to that library.
Absolutely. So yeah, you'd need to have people who administer the system need to have the access as well. There are some. I'm going to talk about updating data shortly, and there's some other tools out there that you can use to manage authentication and stuff like that. So there's definitely ways of doing that. Okay, so what I normally do then here is that if I sort of try and zoom this up a little bit, is I'll look at this screen and say, once again, I can't read it, but I think it's like, here we go. So it's now about 51, maybe down to about 58 or thereabouts is the box. And so then, and if I go to my width, I'll say it's like, you know, I don't really want to go past this mark here, which is the edge of box 14. And so now if I go back into Excel and open that same sizing page, now importantly in this case I do have to turn off the headings and the rows because I want to see the exact same experience in my Excel browser, in my Excel application as I'm going to see on the screen. So I really should turn off sheet tabs as well, but I'm not going to do it for the exercise. And then all I do is I basically try and find that number and say, you know, if it was 10, I'd say, well, can't go past this T in the word editing on the menu bar, and then I just use that as a visual signpost and reference. So, and then I just basically size my workbooks for that purpose. So that's how I do that. Okay, so that's the spacing page. We've done the setup, done the navigation. Okay, it's time to have a look at the hyperlinks. So, first of all, I'll have a look at this. These other two sub-menus here. So these are JavaScript applications, if you like, or a bit of JavaScript code. Now, because I've turned off the Excel menu, I've had cases where customers have wanted to be able to download a snapshot of the workbook. I didn't want to turn back on the Excel menus because that gets away from the make it look not like Excel approach. And so a friend of mine, Scott Sinkoreski, some of you may know him from tinylizard.com, he actually developed both of these bits of code, and he's given it for me to use and given me permission to share it with you if you'd also like to use it. So basically what you do is you just click on this JavaScript and it opens a standard download dialog and takes a copy of the workbook. It's only a copy of the data that's on the screen, so you don't get the entire Power Pivot data model as well. And also importantly, notice that the slices aren't there. So when you download a snapshot, you don't get the slices. And the slices have got some important information because the slices are telling us you know, what selections we've got within the workbook. And so if you're going to enable this option, it's really important that you have some form of confirmation within your data. And so you can see here, if you look at the headings on this chart, I can change any of these slices, and my heading on my chart will update to reflect what's selected. And it's particularly important if you're downloading snapshots with slices on your screen, otherwise you can't tell what the data is. So that's the download download Snapshot. And then the other one is this reset filters. And so basically, once you've got a number of filters set, this is just a little trick. Basically, you can reset these filters just by refreshing your page. And all this piece of JavaScript does is refresh the page. So you click on that and it resets your slices back to the default. And in fact, I need to space this out a little bit better because I've done that about 3 times. So yeah, so it just resets the slices back to the default. So I'll just show you how to do that. So I'll come in and edit this page. I'm not going to redo it. Actually, let me go back to our Bacon page and see if we can just add the code in there. So I've got the that old document, but I'll leave that there now. And so all you need to do is there's this, I should be able to come down. In fact, there's various ways of doing it. Let me come browse down. That this page is very heavy, slow to render, so it's making everything a little bit slow. So I'm just going to click in a blank space down the bottom of this page, and I'm going to insert I really should change this workbook. Okay, so we're going to insert a web part. In fact, I think I can just use this Embed Code option. It throws up this little data entry point. I've got the JavaScript here. This is the download snapshot, and here's the reset filters is up here. So just copy that code and paste it into the dialog. And save. Okay, and now you've got those as 2 options, and that's an example of page-by-page configuration. So you'll notice that if I go to this product report, I don't have those JavaScripts on this particular page. Okay, the last thing I want to show you is this hyperlink demo. So I haven't clicked on this one yet, but I had a client who had a very specific use case. They were migrating from an Excel-based sharing of data, and they used this balanced scorecard approach where they sort of had the high-level objectives of the organisation, and they wanted to be able to click through to a particular page on the Excel workbook that had the results for that particular part of the balanced scorecard. And so this client asked me to be able to replicate that within this experience that I've been showing you. And it's actually surprisingly easy to do, and I just want to show you what that process looks like. So I found this website called Image Map Generator. The link's on this page, so you can see it if you log into the test site. And all you need to do is you upload an image, and so I've got this image that the client used. I've dumbed this down and taken all their sensitive data off it. That's why the graphics doesn't look so good. And so I've loaded this image up, and it's a point-and-click experience. So all I now need to do is I just click and start clicking my way around this shape. And as I do this, down the bottom here, the screen is actually creating the HTML code that's required to make this a clickable area. So I've created that first one, and I'll give it a name. So this one is business maturity, and then click a second area. And you can see how this smartly adjusts and creates these clickable sections. And so this second one is going to be called strategy, and so on and so forth until you've done your entire image. And then it's just a matter of copying that code and using exactly the same approach that I used before. Come back to your site. In this case, I'm on my hyperlink page, and you just inserting a piece of code exactly like I showed you before. And in this case, because it's already there, I'll just go edit source, and there's the code that I created. The only thing you need to do, first of all, you need to upload the image onto your SharePoint server so that it's there to render, and then basically just give it the address where to find it on your SharePoint site, and click save, and that's it. And then you end up with this, this clickable experience. So I haven't built this out completely, but if I click on one of these objects, it's just a hyperlink now that takes me to another page that I've already configured, where you would have maybe some sort of reference point and another report, and there's just a return to main page hyperlink. So as I click on any of these, it just gives me a different page. Okay, I'm running out of time, so let me wrap up the demo there and go back to a couple of wrap-up slides, and then we'll probably have a minute or so for questions. So basically what we did, we had a look at the standard SharePoint experience, and in fact you can use that link to go and have a look at that on my site, as well as the enhanced experience. We talked about preparing the workbook to load. The key things, you have to hide the unused columns and rows to control the scroll bars, but don't do anything else. If possible, use CSS as a way of hiding those other objects that you don't want to see. And you may end up needing a different page for mobile and dashboard, depending, because these days you've got these widescreen devices and you've got these portrait mobile devices, and that can be a problem. So you need to do a couple of things to make SharePoint Enterprise work. So we talked about the BI features and the styling, and etc. And then you load up the workbooks, create a page, insert a web part, and connect the book to the page, and basically you get the final outcome. So this will be in the deck. Each of these are embedded text files with those items that I shared. I think it's going to work in PDF. To be honest, I haven't tested it, so if anyone downloads this and tries to use it and can't get it, please drop me an email. My email is in the document, and I will do my best to double check and make it available another way if it doesn't work. A couple of things I just want to wrap up, because a couple of other concepts which I haven't specifically talked about. So first of all, iPad. Now there's a few problems with accessing SharePoint on iPad. One of the biggest ones is you cannot save your password in Safari for a SharePoint site. And so if you've got an email address and a decent encrypted password, entering that data every time you want to open and have a look at your dashboard is going to be a real problem. So the solution that I found is to use this product here called Atomic Browser. There's a free version and a paid version, which is a couple of bucks. There's extra features on the paid version. And importantly, it will save your password. This will pop up and you just click this submit button. And then, so that's the first step. And then importantly, you can save a home page. And so I've got this set up so that it goes directly to that home dashboard page that I said there. And it also goes automatically into full screen mode. So this is a browser, but there's no browser artifacts at the top of the page. And of course, all of the slice and dice buttons and everything continue to work. There is one problem that's not resolved, and that is that it doesn't support multi-select slices. But as many of you would know, Microsoft solved that in Excel 2016, where basically they've added a little multi-select button on each of the slices, which will allow you to do that on a touch device. So there's the link to download that. As I said, it's a free version if you want to give it a try. And then if you get the free version, you can go to my site and enter the credentials and see what the experience is like. As far as optimizing for online storage goes, I mean, once you start uploading your data models, every workbook has got its own encapsulated data model, right? And that can become a problem. So the way to solve that is to have one master workbook that's got the data model involved. You load it up into the SharePoint gallery, and then there's these two little buttons here which allow you to create a new workbook, either PowerView or Excel, connecting directly to your data model on that single workbook which you've loaded up. And then that just becomes a reporting front end. Rob Colley, I'm pretty sure, invented the term thin reporting. And so basically you just format your workbook and then you save that up on SharePoint as well. And you can do as many of those thin workbooks as you want, and they all point to the master workbook that created there. And then refreshing workbooks is the other challenge. So there's a few ways of doing it. I know people that are using the SharePoint scheduler, and that works well in many cases. It can be a problem if you're using a hosted third-party cloud solution, because when this schedule runs, it needs to have connection to your database. And so that implies that you need some sort of VPN connection or something to be able to connect from your network through to the cloud-based provider. So that can be a problem in some cases. I've used VBA and FileSync in the past. I found that worked pretty well, provided my file size wasn't too big, but once I started to get 200 meg workbooks and things like that, it became a problem. And then all you do is you map one of your network drives to the SharePoint drive, and then as it changes, it will automatically sync up. So that does work, but I've actually abandoned that approach now. And then most recently, there's a product that's on the market called Power Update. This has only been out for a couple of months, and I actually use this tool now as my preferred approach. And so basically it gives you full control. You can set as many events as you want. It will refresh workbooks on your PC, and then importantly, it'll then send them to the place that you want to send them it'll put them onto SharePoint, it'll put them onto a file server. I think it throws it out to an FTP server if you need be. It maybe even does email, I'm not 100% sure, but there's a lot of options there. So now there is a cost. It's order of magnitude $500 for the license or something like that. But very quickly you'll get to a point where that becomes pretty good value for money. So that's the approach that I would recommend if you're looking for a refresh solution. So that's it. I'm literally on time, and hopefully I had chance for most of your questions during the presentation, but if you have any other questions now, I'll take them. And please, before you go, don't forget about the evaluation. I'd love to have your feedback, so please give me that. But back to Q&A. Yes, thank you.